Some truths do not enter your life with noise. They are already standing inside your house, waiting for you to open the door and see them for yourself. After 2 months away on a business trip, I flew home 2 weeks earlier than planned with a secret growing quietly inside my body. I was pregnant. I did not tell my husband in advance. I wanted to see his face when he found out he was going to be a father. On the ride home from the airport, I was still thinking that we would open a bottle of wine that night, sit in the kitchen, and I would tell him that everything was about to change. But when I walked into the house, the first thing I saw was balloons, baby gifts, and a baby lying in my husband's arms. Not my baby, his baby with my best friend. My name is Lilith. I am 37 years old, and I work as a negotiator for major corporations. My job is to step into deals that are falling apart and negotiations that everyone else believes are beyond saving, and find a way to drag everything back into some form of order. I am used to cold conference rooms, half-truths, and the sight of people clenching their hands just before they hide what they really want. I make very good money because I can read situations fast, keep a clear head, and never let emotion distort a decision. Outside of work, I lived with my husband, Brendan Lincoln, in a beautiful house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. From the outside, we were the kind of couple people envied: mature, professionally established, busy but tidy, never dramatic. As for Paula, she had been in my life long before I ever married Brendan. We met in our second year of college, at that age when you do not yet have anything in your hands, but still believe you will someday have everything if you are disciplined enough. We went through those years side by side, working small jobs while studying, eating instant noodles, sitting in my old car, talking about the future like it was a place that was guaranteed to arrive. Paula was there through so many of my early milestones: when I got my first real job, when I fell in love with Brendan, when I got married. She was always there in that soft, comforting way that makes a person feel lucky to have a friend who has witnessed nearly the entire journey of their becoming. I used to think Paula understood me better than many people in my own family. Only now, looking back, I can finally admit there was always something strange in the way she watched my life. It was not hatred. It was not simple admiration either. It looked more like someone quietly measuring the distance between her life and yours, as if she always stayed close enough to know the exact moment you might let your guard down. Brendan was different. He entered my life carrying stability. He was not especially sharp. He was not particularly dazzling, but he had a warmth that made people lower their guard without even realizing it. Brendan worked in operations for a regional logistics company. He did not earn what I earned, but enough that our life together appeared balanced. I was usually the one traveling more, working more, making the heavier decisions. Brendan was the one home more often, the one keeping the daily rhythm of things, looking after the kitchen, the yard, and the little practical details a marriage always needs someone to remember. The division between us had settled naturally. I used to think that was a sign of a mature marriage. Now, looking back, I understand that some kinds of balance only look beautiful as long as neither person steps beyond the line they were given. The Seattle business trip began like any other, a brutal restructuring deal. Two sides had been fighting for months without closing anything that truly mattered. I was sent in because they needed someone used to standing between oversized egos and calm enough not to get dragged under by them. At first, I was only supposed to stay 3 weeks. In the end, the trip stretched to nearly 2 months. Seattle that season was gray, cold, and able to pull a person into the feeling that they were living by meeting calendars more than by real time. I moved almost entirely between hotel rooms, conference rooms, company cars, and late dinners with people still trying to save face. Brendan still called regularly. Paula also texted from time to time, asking if I was eating, if I was sleeping, and whether she should swing by the house and help Brendan with anything. Brendan was actually the one who suggested it first. He said if anything came up, Paula could always stop by. At the time, it felt perfectly normal to me. A husband at home, a best friend willing to help, a wife away on business. That arrangement did not feel suspicious then. Around week 6, my body started feeling different. I tire more quickly. My stomach turned in the mornings. The smell of coffee in the hotel lobby suddenly made me want to walk the other way. At first I thought it was stress. In my line of work, the body sometimes reacts before the mind catches up. But one morning, while standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I suddenly realized I was several days late. I stared at my phone for a long time. Then I put on my coat, pulled my cap low, and crossed to the pharmacy in front of the hotel like a woman carrying a secret she was still afraid to name. I bought 2 tests, not because I lacked belief, only because I needed one more confirmation before I let myself believe something that big. I still remember the pale blue bathroom light, the cold tile under my feet, the sound of traffic outside, and the moment the 2 lines appeared. I sat down on the closed toilet lid and could not breathe for a few seconds. I was pregnant. I looked back at the first test several more times, then used the second one, like someone trying to prove that miracles should at least allow for human error. The result was the same. 2 lines. Something tiny on white plastic, but enough to split my life into before and after. I sat in that bathroom for a very long time, one hand on my stomach, thinking about Brendan, about the kitchen back home, about a child who could change the whole rhythm of our life. I thought about the many times Brendan and I had talked about children, then set the thought aside because of work, timing, because life always found some other thing to shove in between. And then, at last, the news arrived on a completely ordinary morning in Seattle. I did not tell Brendan right away, not because I did not trust him, only because I wanted to see his face when he learned he was going to be a father. In my work, everything gets crushed into emails, attachments, and rushed calls. I wanted this joy to be delivered eye to eye, in shared space, in a moment we would remember later. From that point on, the trip changed meaning completely. I still went to meetings, I still closed terms, I still spoke in that cool, certain voice when I had to. But underneath all of it was a warm, bright secret that belonged only to me. I started rearranging everything so I could fly home 2 weeks earlier than planned. It was not easy. My schedule was packed. There were still several key points in the deal that had not been settled. But if there is one thing I am very good at, it is knowing exactly when to force a slow-moving process into the next stage. I compressed the meetings. I pushed for faster answers. I cut away the usual circles of delay. There were nights when I barely slept, but I did not feel exhausted. I felt like I was moving quickly towards something beautiful. On the way to the airport, I stopped and bought Brendan a small pair of cufflinks, nothing expensive. Just enough to begin the conversation I had already scripted in my mind. I got you something, and I have something else to tell you. The flight back to Portland was not long, but anticipation made it drag. I sat by the window with one hand resting on my lower stomach more often than usual. I did not text Brendan ahead of time. I wanted the surprise to be complete. On the drive home from the airport, I kept imagining him opening the door, going still for 1 second, then smiling and pulling me into his arms because I had come home early. I thought about the kitchen table, about that evening, about the way life would divide in 2 from that point on, before and after. Then the taxi turned into our neighborhood, and I froze. There were too many cars parked in front of my house. Brendan's car, Paula's car, several others lined along the curb. The driver asked if he had the right address. I said yes, but something thin and cold was already moving through my stomach. Not strong enough to call fear. Just a tiny sound inside intuition. I paid him, pulled my suitcase out, and stood still for a few seconds on the stone walkway. I could hear laughter drifting from inside. I could smell food, the kind of cheerful noise that belongs to a gathering. I stepped onto the porch and opened the door. The instant the door swung open, I knew my house was no longer in its normal state. Balloons were tied in clusters in the corner of the living room. Cream ribbons were looped along the stair rail. The table by the door was stacked with pastel-wrapped boxes. The air inside was thick with the smell of baked goods and sugary food. I stood there with my suitcase in one hand and the gift bag for Brendan in the other, and my mind almost stopped moving. I shut the door very softly behind me. There are moments like that when your body does not have time to get angry. It only has time to understand that you have stepped into a place where something is terribly wrong. I walked toward the kitchen. With every step, the house revealed a new kind of unfamiliar arrangement, a new table runner, pale flowers, gift bags decorated with ducklings, bottles, stars, trays of baby-themed cookies spread across the counter. I even saw a gift bag with Brendan's name written on the tag. My husband's name. In my kitchen, surrounded by things that had absolutely nothing to do with me. My first sensation still was not anger. It was numbness. Then I saw the cake. It sat in the middle of the kitchen island, larger than the kind people buy for an ordinary gathering, white and pale blue piping, and across the top, in clear, scripted frosting, the words read, "Congratulations, Brendan and Paula." I read it once, then again. Beside it stood a little display board with a photo of a newborn swaddled in a blanket. At the foot of the board sat baby gifts and a card welcoming baby boy Lincoln. Not just pregnant, the baby had already been born, which meant the affair had been going on far longer than any span of time I could have guessed in those first few seconds. I was standing in my own kitchen, pregnant with my husband's child, and directly in front of me was a celebration for his other child. I do not know how long I stood there, maybe only seconds, but I remember exactly how it felt. There was no roaring in my ears, nothing shattered, just a clean, icy sensation moving down my spine as if someone had erased the entire old map in my head with one short sentence. I set the gift bag down on the edge of the counter. My eyes moved over the other cards. Some were addressed only to Paula, some to both of them together. All of them made the same thing clear. They had already been recognized as a pair. The voices from the backyard grew louder. I walked to the sliding glass door. Through the glass, I could see nearly 20 people scattered across the yard. A few neighbors, some mutual friends, several faces from Brendan's family, and in the center of all of them, Brendan was holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket, rocking him with the easy motion of someone who had already practiced the movement many times. Paula sat in one of the patio chairs, her hair softly curled, wearing a cream dress, smiling with the calm ease of a woman sitting exactly where she believed she belonged. That image changed the cold inside me into something sharper, a clean, cutting realization. A lot of people knew. I was the last one. I slid the door open and stepped outside. No one noticed me at first. One of Brendan's old friends was saying something about how the baby had his father's eyes. Brendan's mother was holding up a tiny onesie for someone else to admire. Paula leaned slightly toward Brendan the way people do when they have already settled into each other's daily rhythm. Then someone turned, saw me, and went silent. The silence spread fast. Small groups stopped speaking, faces turned. Brendan followed the direction of their gaze and went completely still. Paula's face drained of color. I stood in my own backyard, and they all looked at me as if I were the one appearing in the wrong place. No one spoke during the first few seconds. Brendan was the first to open his mouth, but all that came out was my name. Paula placed a hand on the arm of her chair like she was about to stand, then sank back down. Brendan's mother looked from me to the baby and back to Brendan with the expression of someone who knew this moment was never supposed to happen like this. The absurd part is that I did not cry. I did not scream. I just looked at my house, then at the table of gifts, then at the baby in my husband's arms, and understood that the deepest shock did not lie in the affair itself. It lay in the fact that they had used my house to celebrate replacing me. I did not ask why. I did not need to. Some questions only give other people time to organize their lies. My job had trained me well enough to recognize when a room was already trying to draft an emergency script. Brendan took one step toward me, then stopped. Paula said quietly that she could explain. That tone almost made me laugh. Explain what, when the baby was already in his arms, when everything had gone so far that there was a party, guests, gifts, and my house turned into a stage. I turned, walked back inside, crossed the living room still filled with balloons and ribbons, and pulled my suitcase toward the front door. No one stopped me. Maybe they were too shocked. Maybe they knew no one had the right to stop me then. I still had not told a single person that I was pregnant. The warm secret I had brought home for Brendan was now sitting silently inside me, completely out of rhythm with the scene that had just happened in the yard. I stepped down from the porch, pulled my suitcase after me, and called a car with a steady hand, even though my whole body had gone cold. The car arrived 7 minutes later. I did not turn back for one last look. That night, I went home carrying the best news of my life. But by the time I walked back out through that front door, I knew one thing. The man I had intended to tell was about to become a father had already become one a long time ago. I checked into an airport hotel around 11 that night. The front desk was brightly lit, quiet and cold, in the way temporary places always feel when you still do not fully understand what has just happened to your life. I looked at my wallet and at my suitcase, then told the clerk I would leave the booking open-ended for now. The answer sounded more like something said by a woman discussing a work schedule than a marriage. The cufflinks I had bought Brendan were still sitting inside their little box, so light they almost felt absurd. I sat down on the edge of the bed, took off my shoes, placed one hand on my stomach, and stared at the pale cream wall across from me. When shock is large enough, the human body sometimes chooses to function like a machine. I still unpacked things into drawers. I still hung my coat on the hook. I still poured water from the minibar bottle into the paper cup. Every movement was small and precise, only my mind felt as if someone had torn it apart and was dropping the pieces back slowly. Near midnight, I turned my phone back on again. The screen lit up with a long string of missed calls. Brendan had called the most. Paula came next, then Brendan's mother, then his sister. I stared at those names and realized the first pain was not the affair itself. It was the fact that they already had an entire response system ready the moment I walked out. They did not begin reacting because of a sudden accident. They started running damage control because this was a life that had already been functioning long before I found it. I leaned back against the headboard and began replaying the past several months the same way I reconstruct a failed deal. In my profession, things rarely collapse because of one sentence. They collapse because of a chain of small signs that get dismissed while people still want to believe they have control. Brendan had been video calling much less. Some nights he texted that he was cooking and could only do audio. Other nights he blamed the connection. A few times I called back and he let the phone ring, then texted that he had just stepped out to take the trash. When I was still in Seattle, those things sounded so small that I minimized them instantly. Now, each detail came back carrying a completely different weight. Paula, too. She had once been the kind of friend who answered me almost immediately for years. But once the Seattle trip began, Paula started slowing down. Sometimes she said she was in meetings. Sometimes she said she was exhausted. Sometimes she sent nothing but a heart or one short line. I had not thought much of it because I was busy too. Looking back now, I see that Paula was not simply busy. She was shifting away from the role of a friend who stayed in rhythm with me into the role of a woman occupied with living inside my house. There had been a few video calls from the kitchen. I still remember a ceramic vase on the shelf moving from the right side to the left, a little stool disappearing from the window corner, then reappearing in a different spot a week later. At the time, I thought Brendan was just tidying or moving things around. Now I understood that the space in my house had been rearranged by another woman's hands. The pain did not come from the objects themselves. It came from realizing the house had kept moving, changing, and receiving another rhythm while I was away, and the person creating that rhythm was no longer me. One night in Seattle, after a long meeting, I had called Brendan and heard a faint sound in the background that resembled a baby crying or laughing. I asked if someone was over. Brendan laughed and said it was probably the neighbors because they had a family visiting with a small child. I believed him instantly, not because his answer was good, only because I still had no reason to examine it under glass. That is what betrayal uses. It does not need a perfect story. It only needs you to be still willing to fill in the gaps for it. I walked to the window, pulled back the curtain, and looked out at the parking lot washed in yellow light. Then I placed my hand on my stomach again. The secret inside me suddenly felt both warm and dangerous. I still had not told Brendan I was pregnant. I was keeping it quiet no longer for romance, but because I no longer knew exactly what I was facing. A few hours earlier, this news had been a gift. Now it had become a piece of information I needed to protect. That feeling made me sad in a very strange way. The moment a woman begins looking at her own good news as evidence to be guarded, her life has already changed. Brendan started calling again, close to 1 in the morning. I stared at his name flashing on the screen for a very long time before I let the call die. The text came immediately afterward. He wrote, "It's not what you think." That line almost made me laugh. I hear that kind of language every day at work. It is the classic opening move of someone who needs more time to construct the most survivable version of events. It is not meant to explain. It is meant to delay. Brendan called again. Then I texted again. He said he needed to explain. He said things were more complicated than they looked. He said I should not make decisions while I was in shock. The more I read, the more familiar it felt. Not because I loved him, because it was the exact verbal structure people use when they are trying to pull you away from facts and back into a foggier emotional territory where they can regain control. About 15 minutes later, Paula texted too. Her message was longer, wetter, and written in the tone of someone who wanted me to feel that I should somehow be grateful she was hurting too. Paula said she had never intended to hurt me. She said everything had happened gradually. She said they had both tried to resist their feelings and could not. I read that line and put the phone down. Not because I was shocked anymore, because for the first time, I could clearly see that Paula was writing like a woman trying to legitimize taking her friend's place. The language of her message was not centered on me at all. It was centered on her right to justify herself. That detail told me everything. I sat back down and started thinking about college. Paula had never been openly jealous of me. She was too smart for that. But there had always been moments I let pass. Whenever I won a scholarship, Paula would laugh and joke that professors probably loved overly confident women like me. Whenever I landed a good position, she would say the same thing. That I always had perfect timing. When I first started seeing Brendan, Paula used to joke that men always noticed me first. Back then, I thought it was just the slightly bitter self-mockery of a young woman still figuring herself out. Now, looking back, I could see a red thread running all the way through. At 2 in the morning, Brendan's mother called. I let it ring a few times before answering. She did not apologize. She simply asked where I was and whether I had calmed down. That question confirmed what I needed to know. She had known beforehand. I did not tell her where I was. I only said I was more stable than they probably expected. She paused, then said this had all happened in a way nobody wanted. I cut across her and asked how long she had known. She did not answer directly, but her silence lasted long enough to speak for her. People only go that quiet when they are deciding between different grades of lying. After that, Brendan's sister texted too. She said I should give Brendan the chance to explain things privately and not let everything become a war. I stared at the word war and felt tired. Outsiders love neutral words when they want to describe the behavior of the people who caused the problem. No one said what Brendan and Paula had done to me. They immediately moved to managing my reaction instead. That told me Brendan's family was not waiting to determine right and wrong. They were waiting for me to find out, then hoping I would behave in a way that made the whole story less embarrassing for them. I turned the phone face down, walked into the bathroom, and washed my face for a long time with cold water. In the mirror, I saw a woman still wearing travel clothes, hair slightly disordered, mascara blurred at the corners, and a strange calmness I might not have recognized in myself before. I had always imagined that if I ever discovered Brendan cheating, I would scream, cry, lose my voice. But that night, I felt my mind beginning to shift into a different mode. In my profession, strong emotion is often the exact currency the other side wants you to pay with your position. If I remained only a devastated wife, they would control the story. If I stayed a negotiator, I would look at evidence, time, money, motive, and the order of interest in the entire board. That thought rearranged everything inside me. I took the work notebook out of my bag, opened it to a blank page, and began writing. Date the Seattle trip began. Video calls that had been canceled. Delayed responses from Paula. Baby sounds in the background. Objects in the house are changing position. The day I learned I was pregnant. The day I flew home early. The party had been organized, which meant planning had happened. The baby had already been born. So the affair had not been a matter of a few months. It was a stable enough structure that the whole small community around my house had already accepted it. Writing it down changed the shape of the betrayal. It was no longer a blurred nightmare. It was beginning to form a map. Close to 3, Brendan sent a longer message. He wrote that the worst part was that I misunderstood everything. He said there were things he had intended to tell me when I came home on the original schedule, in a calmer setting. That message made me stand up and start pacing the room. That was the part that hurt differently. He had not only betrayed me, he had planned the timing of when I would be permitted to learn that I had been replaced. In Brendan's mind, my coming home early had thrown off the rhythm, which meant that if I had returned on the right day, everything might have been arranged more beautifully and the wording more carefully prepared, and I would have been expected to play the proper role of the betrayed wife who was still required to stay composed. Around 4 in the morning, I canceled my Monday return to the office and made an urgent appointment with myself. I would not go back to that house as a woman arriving only to cry. I would go back as someone who needed to see what had been moved in, who had been given keys, where the money had gone, how the schedules had shifted, and what story Brendan and Paula had been building about me while I was gone. The child inside me made every choice heavier, but it also made my objective clearer. I was not allowed to react in ways that weakened me now. Not this time. When the sky finally began to lighten behind the frosted hotel window, I sat down again on the edge of the bed, placed my hand over my stomach, and whispered the first sentence I had spoken to my child. "Mom is here." It sounds simple. But in that moment, it was a promise. I would not allow this baby to enter a web of lies I had not yet properly named. During that first night in the hotel, I understood that I had not simply been betrayed. I had been replaced little by little while I was still convinced I was protecting the life I had built. The next morning, I did not go back to the house right away. I waited until almost noon, when Brendan texted that he was out with Paula and the baby. The message was written as though I were still part of their shared routine. That only confirmed further how little the two of them understood the line they had crossed. I drove back slowly, parked a short distance away, and remained still in the car for several minutes. I did not want to walk in carrying the posture of a wounded wife. I wanted to enter the way I entered a fraudulent file. Calm, clear objective, no skipped detail. I unlocked the door with my own key. The smell inside had changed, not dramatically, just a mixture of baby formula, soft laundry detergent, and Paula's favorite candle from college, vanilla amber. It was burning in the living room of my house. People only bring their own signature scent into someone else's house when they have already decided it belongs to them now. I set my bag down on a chair, left the lights off, and walked slowly through each room. The house was not messy. It simply felt adjusted by another woman's hands. The wooden tray on the coffee table had been moved. The sofa pillows were in pale new covers. A soft throw blanket had been draped over the arm in the exact loose way Paula used to leave things in her own apartment. Brendan never cared about details like that. The fact that the house felt softer and warmer was not because he had suddenly become attentive. It was evidence of another woman's habits settling over every surface. In the kitchen, I saw 2 familiar drinking cups that had never belonged together before. Brendan's white ceramic mug, Paula's blue-gray travel tumbler, the one she had carried with her since college. It sat in the drying rack as it belonged there. Beside the sink hung a pale pink hand towel I had never bought. I opened the kitchen drawer and found milk storage bags, baby bottles, sterilizing equipment, and tiny infant spoons. What I was looking at was not a scattered affair. It was a nesting process. I went upstairs and entered the guest room first. The door stood half open. Inside was a new rocking chair, a basket of blankets, several boxes of diapers, and a plastic drawer unit full of neatly folded baby cloths. That room had once been where I kept work files and suitcases between long trips. Now it looked like a daily infant care corner. A beige cardigan hung over the chair arm, sitting there as though the house had already adjusted to her presence. The master bedroom made me stand still longer, not because there was some dramatic visual, but because there were too many small changes. A lotion bottle I did not recognize was on the left bedside table. A thin hair clip has fallen behind the lamp, softer cotton sheets than the ones I used to buy. In the connecting bathroom, I found a gray travel makeup bag, one of Paula's serums, and a purple toothbrush. Brendan had not only slept with Paula, he had let her daily life overlap with mine. I photographed everything with my phone. I took the pictures because the memory of a betrayed woman is always the first thing people try to question. A photograph of the purple toothbrush, the serum bottle, the rocking chair, the baby bottle in the kitchen. Each detail alone might have meant little. Together, they built an undeniable reality. Paula did not stop by. Paula had been living there with enough consistency that her belongings no longer looked like a guest's. The clearest traces of the baby's timeline were in the kitchen and living room. I opened every card, every leftover gift box, every unopened bag. One card was dated 3 weeks earlier. Another gift still had an electronic receipt tucked inside from nearly a month before. I zoomed in on the newborn photos displayed on the cake. There were additional photographs clipped to the fridge. In one, the baby lay in a bassinet in the living room corner. In another, Brendan stood on the porch in a gray t-shirt holding him. The outdoor light alone told me the image could not have been taken near the date I returned. I did not need to be a pediatrician to know that baby was not just a few days old. Inside the dining room drawer, I found a small stack of papers from a pediatric clinic. Paula's name appeared on a postpartum follow-up appointment note. The dates showed the baby had been born at least 2 weeks before I came home, which meant that while I was in Seattle touching my own stomach and imagining Brendan's face when he learned he was becoming a father, Brendan had already become one. He had already held the baby, changed him, and welcomed guests to celebrate in my house. Then I moved to the money, because money is the language people have the hardest time denying. For years, I had managed most of our shared accounts because my work made me faster with numbers than Brendan. I opened my old laptop, logged into the accounts I still had access to, and began combing through the previous 3 months. The expenses looked ordinary if viewed separately. Pharmacy, grocery store, baby furniture shop, a delivery service for postpartum supplies, a transfer to an obstetrics clinic, online orders with abbreviated descriptions. But once I grouped them by date, they formed an unmistakable spending rhythm. Brendan had been using shared money and money I had earned to support a second family. I downloaded statements, marked the suspicious entries, and looked deeper. I rented a car on a day I was in Boise for a dispute, bassinet delivery while I was in Denver. An electric breast pump was purchased more than a month ago. Payments for infant daycare, 2 mornings a week. Those things do not appear in a life that merely stumbled. They appear when someone is quietly constructing a family system detailed enough to survive day to day. Brendan had not only betrayed me with his body, he had betrayed me structurally. I moved on to the cloud, the emails, and the device histories. Brendan had never been careful with technology. For years, I had been the one setting up his syncing and recovering his passwords when he forgot them. That dependency had now become an open door. I found chronological photo histories. Paula was sitting in my kitchen the month before, holding a bottle. Brendan was photographing the baby lying on the playmat I had once bought for my sister's daughter, a short backyard video with Paula laughing and Brendan using a nickname for the baby. I checked the shared calendar and found vague entries like doctor, meds, night bottles, and mom coming by. The confirmation emails sharpened the picture even more. Registration for infant delivery subscriptions, confirmation of a collapsible crib order, a payment receipt for a newborn photo package. One email from a portrait studio thanked Brendan and promised their family gallery would be ready the following week. Brendan had allowed other people to call him that, while I was still the legal wife in another city, working to keep our shared life looking intact. Paula had been coming over long before the baby was born. During the day, overnight, whole weekends while I was away for work. Once the evidence became thick enough, my mind swung back toward college almost automatically. I reopened old archives, old message folders, and screenshots I had forgotten I still had. Paula had written certain lines over the years that sounded harmless then and cutting now. After I had been chosen to lead a major student project, she wrote, "You always get the best stage." The first time Brendan came to pick me up after an evening class, Paula texted, "Of course, your life always has something for people to envy." I had once dismissed those lines as slightly bitter but harmless. Now they meant something entirely different. Paula did not just want Brendan, she wanted my position. I remembered the way Paula had started copying my clothes once I moved toward cleaner, darker styles. The way she always asked too many questions about my milestones, from salary to promotions to buying the house, as though my life were a measuring stick for everything she lacked. There had never been one dramatic moment big enough to name on its own. That was exactly what made it dangerous. Some people do not step into your life looking to be loved. They step into it to compare and then wait for the moment they can plant themselves in the exact place you loosened your hold. By the time I looked at Brendan through all of that data, he had changed shape too. Brendan had not betrayed me for some great love. He betrayed me because Paula provided him with a different stage. Next to me, he had to live beside a level of success that made him feel smaller. I traveled more, earned more, made decisions faster, read people better. Rarely needed someone else to hold my hand through the hardest parts of adult life. I had never used any of that to diminish him. But weak self-esteem does not need to be directly attacked to achieve. Next to Paula, Brendan could be seen as stronger, more necessary, more central. Paula did not give him the truth. She gave him the feeling of winning, and Brendan chose that feeling instead of choosing growth. By around 4 that afternoon, I knew I had had enough. I left the house with copies of the photos, the statements, the emails, and all my notes. My next stop was not Brendan, and it was not Paula. I went straight to a lawyer. I chose one who specialized in assets, complex divorces, and the rights connected to an unborn child. I did not want Brendan to have even one more day to spin the story, withdraw funds, alter histories, or turn me into the unstable one in anyone else's eyes. The attorney's office sat in downtown Portland on the 8th floor of a building facing the river. I arrived 10 minutes early, sat in the glass waiting area, one hand resting on my stomach, and admitted to an outsider for the first time that I was pregnant. Saying it aloud made the truth feel more real than even the positive test had. The lawyer let me speak with very few interruptions. I did not tell the story in emotional order. I told it in terms of interests, assets, timeline, and evidence. We discussed the shared accounts, housing rights, financial obligations, proof of shared funds being used for the baby and postpartum care, and the need to protect the legal position of the child I was carrying before Brendan had the chance to reposition the board. When I stepped back out into the evening, my body felt exhausted, but my mind was much clearer. The more evidence I followed, the more certain I became that this was not the sudden fall of a marriage. It was a long process of takeover, fed by envy, selfishness, and the cowardice of the two people I had trusted most. Brendan asked to see me on Friday afternoon, in a short text from his private number. He said he only needed 30 minutes. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. I was not deciding whether to see him. I was only deciding when and where it would benefit me most. In the end, I chose a quiet cafe, busy enough to stay public, 10 minutes from my lawyer's office. I did not want to meet in a house. I did not want Brendan to have the advantage of a private space he could control. I got there early, chose a table by the window, ordered hot water, laid my phone face down, and opened my notebook. Brendan arrived on time, but he looked different from even a few weeks earlier. His tie was looser, his shoulders slightly folded in. He sat down and placed both hands on the table. I did not help him begin. Brendan said first that he was sorry things had happened the way they did. He said he had never wanted me to find out like that. He said the party had just been a mistake of timing. The second he said that, I understood exactly where he was trying to take the conversation. Not confession, not responsibility, but a reduction of each detail until the whole story sounded like a chain of unfortunate circumstances. Then Brendan started using the familiar lines. "You are always away for work. I am alone too much. Everything happened too fast. Paula was there at the right time. I didn't know how to handle it. Listening to him, I felt like I was sitting in just another negotiation room. It was the oldest tactic I knew. When people cannot defend what they did, they start defending the way it happened. Brendan spoke as if he had been swept along by some current bigger than himself. He never used the words affair, lies, or choices. Only lonely, drifted too fast, and didn't know what to do. I did not interrupt him right away. I let him deliver his first full script. Then, when he stopped to drink water, I opened my notebook. I did not ask whether he still loved me. I asked for the timeline. I asked the exact date the baby was born. I asked when Paula first spent the night at the house. I asked who the electric breast pump from the joint account had been purchased for. Brendan stared at me and said he could not remember every detail. I told him I could remind him. On that date, I had been in Boise. The cloud photos showed Paula in my kitchen at 10:43 p.m. You were holding the baby in the gray shirt. There was postpartum medication on the counter. Brendan blinked very slowly. He had not expected me to have gone that far. I kept going. I asked about the pediatric clinic payments. I asked about the infant care service. I asked why the crib rental confirmation had been sent to his email instead of Paula's. Each question was small, but sharp enough to cut apart the way he was telling the story. Brendan started shifting in his seat. His hands tightened. He said I was turning something personal into an investigation file. I told him that he had already turned our marriage into a hidden structure with a timeline, money trails, device histories, and multiple layers of informed witnesses. I had not invented that form. I was only calling it what it was. When he could not keep dodging through softness, Brendan tried another route. He said things between us had been broken for a long time. He said we had drifted apart months before Paula entered the picture. I told him if that were true, then he could tell me the exact day he decided the marriage had already cracked. Brendan went quiet for a while and then said vaguely sometime last spring. I turned my phone toward him and showed him the email he had sent me that same month, saying he missed me, missed home, and missed our late dinners. I asked him which version of home a man with a second family was missing exactly. Brendan had no answer. That was the moment I saw clearly that he was not a man carried away by circumstance. He was a man trying to keep every door open until the last possible second. Brendan then tried to drag the conversation toward emotion. He said Paula made him feel needed. He said that next to me, he always felt behind. I did not argue immediately. I only asked whether that was why he had used my income to build a life with her. Whether feeling needed included letting his wife travel for work to fund the house while he used that house to welcome a child with someone else. Brendan said I was deliberately making everything sound as ugly as possible. I told him I was simply removing every decorative cloth he had draped over it. I met Paula the following night, also in a place I chose. I did not want to go to her apartment. I did not want to give her the advantage of private territory. She arrived 5 minutes late, wearing a cream sweater and very light makeup. She sat down and almost immediately said she did not know where to begin. I told her I would begin then. I said she should not tell me everything happened gradually, because that line had already gone stale by the time Brendan used it. Paula looked at me, swallowed, and said there had been a connection between her and Brendan, that they had both tried to resist for a very long time. She said no one had wanted it to become this. I looked directly at Paula and said the thing I had been carrying since that first hotel night. I told her she did not love me. She had been competing with me from the beginning. Paula sat absolutely still for 2 seconds. Then she gave a tiny laugh. She said I had always had everything. I was always the one chosen, the one professor remembered, the one boss noticed, the one man looked at first, the one with the beautiful house, the one with the career everybody envied. She said living beside me for so long had felt like standing in front of a mirror that constantly reminded her what she lacked. Paula said that next to Brendan, for once, she felt like she could win. She said Brendan needed her in a way I had never needed anyone. That line was both pathetic and revealing. I asked her what exactly she thought she had won. One against a friend who once split food money with her in college. One against the woman who asked her to be maid of honor. One against the woman who handed her a key to the house out of trust. Paula turned her face away, but she did not deny it. That was when I understood the most dangerous thing about her. Paula did not only want Brendan. She wanted the feeling of stepping into my life and standing where I had once stood. I told Paula that Brendan had not chosen her for some deep love. He had chosen whichever place made him feel bigger, and she had provided exactly that. A warped mirror, a stage where he could play the winner while I was turned into the silhouette of expectation. Paula gave a bitter little smile and said that at least with her, Brendan felt needed. I told her any woman can make a weak man feel larger if she is willing to shrink enough around him. That does not make him decent. It only makes them partners in a lie. While I was still speaking with Paula, my phone began vibrating again and again. This time, it was family. Brendan's mother first, then his sister, then my own mother. The content was almost identical, even though the tones differed. They told me to stay calm. They said that at this point, I needed to think about the child. Brendan's mother said a baby needs a father. His sister said every family goes through periods of drifting. My mother asked whether I really wanted to grow older and look back, only to realize I had made too fast a decision. I listened to all of it, and only one thought repeated in my head. Not one of them was talking about Brendan's character. They were talking about the image of family. I had not told anyone except my lawyer that I was pregnant. So every time they used the phrase for the child, it felt like a dull blade scraping across my skin. They were talking about Brendan's and Paula's child. Meanwhile, I was sitting there with my own hand against my stomach, knowing I too carried a life. The only difference was this. I did not want my child growing up in a house where lies were renamed circumstance and betrayal was packaged as something negotiable. Those calls did not weaken me. They clarified the moral shape of the whole situation. If I stayed just to preserve the outer frame of family, I would be teaching my daughter her very first lesson. That women are supposed to endure so that other people can keep admiring the picture. I went back to the hotel close to midnight, sat alone in the chair by the window, and for the first time allowed the decision to form as one complete sentence. I would divorce him. Not because of rage. I would divorce him because I did not want my daughter growing up beside a man like Brendan and calling him father. I did not want her learning to watch her mother shrink herself every day in exchange for the nominal presence of a man who had chosen betrayal, deceit, and takeover as a way of life. I thought about children raised inside families that are only a shell. They learn very early how to read the air. They know when adults are performing normally. They know when a kitchen is too quiet because something inside it has no name. I have sat through too many negotiations not to understand that. A broken structure does not become healthy simply because children are added to it. It only teaches the next generation to treat damage as routine. I did not want my daughter looking at Brendan and thinking that was what women were meant to accept. The next morning, I called my mother back. I spoke very slowly so she would hear every word clearly. I am not staying for the sake of a father in name only. I cannot teach my daughter that a man can cheat, have a child with someone else, and still keep his original place just because society is afraid a broken family looks ugly. My mother went very quiet. Then she said she was afraid I would have to raise the baby alone. I told her that a mother raising a child in truth was still better than a mother raising one in the betrayal of herself. I sent my lawyer the final authorization early that afternoon. I instructed her to begin the full process that same week. I also asked her to prepare everything involving assets, financial obligations, residence, and every legal factor connected to the child I was carrying. When I finished, I sat for several minutes watching traffic below. That evening, Brendan texted one more time. He said we could still fix this if I gave him one chance. I looked at the message, then at the hand resting on my stomach, and in that exact moment, I understood what I truly needed to preserve for my daughter. Not a father by title, but a mother is clear-headed enough to walk out of something toxic before it becomes normal. Some women leave because the pain is too much, and then some women leave because they are finally awake enough to understand that staying is the more dangerous choice. By the end of this story, I knew I was the second kind. I did not walk out of my marriage to Brendan like a woman whose family had been stolen from her. I walked out as the last person still seeing clearly what that house had really been built on. Once you have seen too clearly, you cannot go back and pretend blindness one more time. Brendan did not collapse loudly at first. There was no long public trial, no spectacular scene for outsiders to gather around and discuss. The price he paid came in a quieter but deeper way. First, he lost the stability I had spent years creating around our shared life. Brendan had grown used to every major bill being paid on time, every investment being thought through carefully, every unexpected disruption being absorbed by me before it could shake the structure. Only when I pulled myself out of that system was he forced to face the true shape of his life without my discipline and competence holding it up. In the first days after the lawyer sent the papers, Brendan still tried to sound composed in public. He told a few friends we were simply moving through a difficult phase, but I could see the fracture in him through tiny details: missing a call with his lawyer, forgetting to submit a form on time, sending me messages late at night that shifted between pleading and resentment. I had once been the one who kept the train of his life from jumping the tracks. When I stepped away, the first thing he lost was not me. It was the faith that someone would still be standing behind him, cleaning up the mess. Paula did not get the victory she imagined either. For years, she had probably believed that if she could only step into my position, she would inherit everything that position came with. But life does not work like an empty chair. You do not sit where someone once sat and automatically receive the peace, dignity, or structure they built there. What Paula got was Brendan, a weak man, dependent, cowardly enough to betray a better woman who had spent years building a stable life around him. That is not a prize. It is a damaged object that has shown its flaw a long time ago. I simply took too long to admit what it was. I saw Paula one last time during the legal process. She was dressed better than usual, as if polish could replace substance. But the smugness from the night of the baby party was gone from her eyes. What remained looked more like the face of someone who had finally climbed the hill she had wanted for years, only to realize nothing was waiting at the top except cold wind. Paula still tried to say she had never meant for things to go this far. I let her finish and asked only one question. If Brendan could betray me this easily, why exactly did she believe he would ever behave differently with her? Paula could not answer. Because she understood. A woman who gets a man through betrayal does not live inside triumph. She lives inside the fear that whatever came to her that way can leave the same way. In the first weeks on my own, I began preparing to become a mother by myself. And strangely, in the middle of very real fear, I felt lighter with each passing day. I no longer had to walk into the kitchen and wonder what else inside that house might be hidden. I no longer had to glance at Brendan's phone while forcing my instincts into silence. I no longer had to hear Paula call me friend and wonder what was wrong with the shape of her voice. The loneliness in the hotel and temporary rental was real. But it was clean. It did not sit on my chest like a damp blanket made of lies. I went to my first prenatal appointment alone on a Tuesday morning in light rain. The waiting room was full of couples sitting side by side, hands on folders or paper coffee cups. I will tell the truth. For a very brief moment, it hurt to look at them. Not because I needed Brendan there as some beautiful symbol. It hurt because I had once imagined that moment would be shared with someone. Then, the doctor placed the monitor on my stomach, and my baby's quick little heartbeat filled the room, and every other thought stepped back. I heard that sound as a reminder, simple enough to cut through everything. My daughter did not need a family story that looked pretty on paper. She needed a mother who was truly present. After that appointment, I changed the rhythm of my life around the baby. I cut several trips, shifted part of my work into remote advisory formats, started looking at my calendar through a different lens. That was a major change for someone like me. I had once been proud that I could go anywhere, handle any crisis, and live out of a suitcase if necessary. Now I had to learn a different kind of strength. Less running, more listening to my own body, accepting that efficiency was no longer the only measure of a successful day. I was afraid, yes, afraid of the nights alone, afraid of the moment the baby would come and there would not be a complete family standing around me. But that fear was still easier to breathe through than staying in the old house and teaching my child to call deceit sacrifice. I decided to use Mercer again in all my official paperwork. Some people think changing a name is merely administrative. For me, it felt more like setting my own skeleton back in place. Lincoln was tied to years of learning to make me softer than necessary, so a marriage could still look peaceful. Mercer pulled me back to the self I had been before I shrank my voice, my schedule, and even the scale of my ambition so a man could feel comfortable around me. I was not changing my name because I wanted to erase Brendan from my past. I was changing it because I did not want my future stamped by his wrong choice. The moment of signing the name change papers in the county office sounded ordinary, but it reached me deeply. I wrote Lilith Mercer in black pen across a stack of plain documents. The woman behind the counter nodded, stamped them, and slid the file aside. To her, it was one administrative case among many. To me, it was the moment I picked up a piece of myself that had been dissolved into marital routine for too long. Some things are never handed back. You have to bend down and collect them yourself, one piece at a time, once you stop waiting for anyone else to return them. As a negotiator, I had once believed I was very good at reading people. I can tell when someone is speaking in circles. I can spot the smile that never quite reaches the eyes. I can sense when a contract has been written to look clean while quietly trapping one side. I made a very good living with that skill. And yet, inside my own house, I missed too many signs. I missed them because I loved them. Because habit is strong. Because a stable life always gives people reasons to explain away what feels wrong. The most painful professional lesson I received from my marriage did not come from a collapsing business deal in any conference room. It came from this. Intelligent women can blind themselves for a very long time when the thing in front of them is something they still want to keep. I spent a lot of time thinking about the word negotiate. My work is negotiation. It means believing there is always some middle point, some space that can still be saved. But marriage is not always supposed to be saved just because you are skilled enough to drag it one more time away from the edge. Some structures rot to the point that holding them together any longer only distorts the people trapped inside them. What truly saved me was not the lawyer, not the accounts, not the emails I found. What saved me was the moment I stopped negotiating with something that was no longer worth preserving. I also came to understand another truth. Paula did not steal my life. She stole only the outer surface of what she desired. A husband, a house, a central place at a party. But she did not take my mind, my work, my identity, or the child I carried. Brendan did not destroy my future either. He only exposed a rotten section in my present that would eventually have damaged my future much more if it had been left untouched. Some losses look like annihilation in the first moment. Later, you realize they were opening an exit. People sometimes ask whether I still feel regret. I do. I regret the dream of that night in the kitchen when I would have told Brendan I was pregnant. I regret the version of me that believed being good for long enough would eventually be returned with goodness. But regret is not the same thing as wanting to go back. It is simply how we look at an old road and admit that we were sincere while walking it. Brendan sent a few texts after the settlement, sometimes asking if I need anything for the baby, sometimes bringing up memories as if shared history could make the present less real. I read them but rarely answered. Not because I needed to perform coldness, but because I no longer considered soothing his emotions part of my work. Legally, everything moved faster than I expected. Brendan did not fight as hard as he might have, partly because he knew the financial evidence was not on his side, partly because his own family wanted the matter closed neatly. The final settlement was not dramatic, but it was clean. I separated myself from every unnecessary linked account. I kept what was mine and the rights attached to the child I was carrying. Brendan kept what was truly his. The rest, the part of life he had once leaned on me to provide, was gone. I found a two-story townhouse on the east side of the city, with large windows facing a row of maples. On moving day, the sky was bright, and there was a thin wash of sunlight on the street. I stacked boxes of books into the front room that would later become my office. I folded baby clothes into a low dresser. I placed a wooden chair by the second bedroom window and stood back to look at the square of light inside the room. Nothing about it was spectacular, but it was the first time in weeks that I felt I was entering a space where I did not have to perform. The first night in the new place, I did not turn on the television. I just moved slowly from room to room, touching the edges of tables, opening cabinets, checking the locks, and then standing still in the upstairs hallway. The house smelled like paint, wood, and half-unpacked cardboard. It had no history yet. That was what made me feel safe. Old houses often force people to keep performing old versions of themselves. A new one lets you decide who you will be inside it. I placed my hand on my stomach, felt the smallest movement beneath the skin, and understood that from this point on, I would be building a life that did not depend on anyone's performance. I did not leave that marriage like a woman whose family had been stolen from her. I left as the final person who saw clearly and refused to keep living inside a lie. They once believed I would be the woman who came home too late to save her family. But the truth is, I came home just in time to save myself and my daughter from having to live inside their lie.
I want to open this final part with the most painful paradox in the whole story. Lilith flew home to tell her husband she was about to become a mother. But when the front door opened, what greeted her was a party celebrating the fact that someone else had become a mother before her, with her own husband. The one man who should have heard her news first was already standing there holding a child with another woman. That image alone turns this story into something beyond ordinary drama. It becomes a story about a woman having her place stolen inside her own life. The thing that chills me most is not the baby. The baby did nothing wrong. The pain comes from the way Brendan and Paula used that child as public evidence that Lilith had already been replaced. The cruelty is not the truth itself. It is the position in which they forced her to confront it. That is why the house is no longer just a setting in this story. To me, it becomes the line of personal dignity. When Paula moved into that space with her own things, she was not just staying over. She was staking a claim. And when Brendan held that celebration in the kitchen, he turned a space that once belonged to his wife into the place where she was formally displaced. That is a very cold form of occupation and a very hard one to forgive. I also do not see Paula as a simple villain. What makes her more dangerous than a typical affair partner is the envy that has been growing for years. Some people do not truly want a life of their own. They only want to take something from someone else so they can feel that they won. Paula did not just want Brendan. She wanted Lilith's position. She wanted the feeling of being chosen in the life of the woman who had always made her feel smaller. That is the kind of person who can destroy you very slowly, with patience. Brendan is different. I see him as the kind of weak man whose weakness has been wrapped very carefully. He could not bear living beside a woman more capable than himself. Instead of growing up enough to stand beside her, he went looking for another space where he could feel larger. Paula became the mirror that made his little ego easier to live with. That is why this affair is not sustained by profound love. It is sustained by selfishness, insecurity, and the need to be adored. The fact that Lilith kept her pregnancy to herself makes this story twice as painful. She walked into that house with a life inside her, but she no longer had any chance to place that truth in the right hands. Life often does not hurt us by screaming. It hurts us by being coldly ironic. That moment also marks an important shift. Lilith stepped out of the role of wife that night, and she began thinking like a mother. That is why I do not look at her divorce as the act of a woman leaving simply because she is hurt. I look at it as an act of mothering. She does not want her daughter growing up with the lesson that women should stay inside a broken structure just to preserve the image of family. She does not want her child to learn that betrayal is just an adult problem that women are expected to absorb. What she is protecting is not only herself, She is protecting the very first moral standard her daughter will be raised on. I also think this story tells a very real truth about women's intuition. Betrayal rarely begins with one massive shock. It usually starts when a woman sees a few things slightly out of place, then teaches herself to smooth over the feeling. Brendan called less. Paula answered more slowly. Objects in the house moved. There were baby sounds in the background. But toxicity enters a life through details like that. It grows only because we train ourselves to overlook them. And finally, this is what I want to keep. Lilith is not the woman who lost her husband. She is the woman who saw the rot before she brought a child into it. This story does not glorify collapse. It glorifies clarity. Some relationships should not end only when love ends. They should end the moment you realize you are being made smaller, so someone else can live comfortably inside their lie. Lilith came home at exactly the right time to save the part of herself that mattered, and the future of her daughter, too. If you have ever had a moment when your instincts were right, but you still kept trying to convince yourself everything was fine, leave the comment, "I see it now." Some truths save your life the sooner you face them directly. And if you want to keep hearing stories about betrayal, family, and the way women reclaim themselves, stay with me for the next video. Because sometimes what saves a woman is not love. It is the moment she stops negotiating.